Friends, how are you? You surviving out there? This is Carter, and this is the next episode of Making It Up. And if you've been listening, you'll know that this is a conversation series between writers. So I sit down with other writers and we just get into it. And we have a lot of fun. And I get different people on. And, you know, I feel like lately I've been having a spate of thriller, mystery, suspense guests. And today's guest, which I'll get to in just a minute, is kind of adjacent to that, but has written something altogether different. So we'll discuss that in just a minute. First things first. Hey, if you're looking for a really scary thriller, check out my new novel, Tell Me What You Did. It's in the bookstores now. It's doing quite well. It surpassed all my greatest expectations. You could call it my breakout novel, however you want to define that. And if you're watching this on video, you'll see a stack of them right behind me. It's that beautiful bright orange color cover that my publisher just did an amazing job with. All right, let's talk about today's guest. So today on the show, I had G.T. Karber. So maybe that name rings a bell to you, maybe it doesn't. He has definitely written books and he has written screenplays, went to film school at USC, grew up in Arkansas. And one day, you know, he was kind of putting some things together, and actually he was procrastinating, writing one of his books. So he created a little murder mystery puzzle that he gave to his friend, and thus began his realm into creating what is now known as Murdle. So Murdle is a massive success, hundreds of thousands of copies of his books out there. But basically Murdles are little murder mystery puzzles, kind of structured almost like a Wordle in a way, that is highly addictive. You know, you can solve a single Myrtle mystery in like 20 minutes. And it has just taken him into a path that he never expected. So we go into detail about that. We go into detail about his life and his upbringing in the South. And I'm not going to lie to you, we went off-roading a lot in this conversation. This is a long conversation. It's over an hour because we just went off on tangents, which was fun. I mean, and that's kind of how the show is designed, is I don't have a set structure. So if there's a topic that we kind of just start going down, we'll go down it. So I hope you appreciate the length. And then of course we made up a crafty little mystery at the end on the spot. And we used books that all contain the word murder in the title. So make sure you check out his Myrtle, and I think you're going to like this conversation. This is my chat with G.T. Karber.
Thank you so much.
So where are you? Where do you live?
Oh, I live in Los Angeles.
So I grew up there, in kind of the suburbs. So are you in the city?
I'm in a neighborhood called Palms, which is like just north of Culver City, on Venice Boulevard. So it's like we're kind of close to the beach, which we never ever go to. We have not once made use of our close proximity.
I grew up in Westlake Village, Thousand Oaks area, and my buddy and I spent one summer going down to Venice Beach selling hand-painted stick figure t-shirts. It was just the most bizarre. Like, we would like say like, all right, what do you want in your t-shirt? It's like, oh, I want to have a guy holding a cat. I'm like, all right. It was just this shitty stick figure art, and people bought them. And I'm like, this is ridiculous that this is even happening.
I love that. That is like, this is going to sound like I'm like gassing you up, but that's sort of like my like kind of like the sort of dream concoctions I would have like as a kid of like some business, you know?
Right.
I love kind of like, we can go sell this thing that we make, and we just do it, and people just want it. And there's not like, you know, we're not sitting around trying to convince somebody to mass produce our t-shirts. We're just selling them every day. No, I love that.
Right. And I love the fact, but the best part was the fact that the fact that we couldn't draw or were artistic at all didn't stop us. It's like, well,
Yeah.
we could just do stick figures. And I
No barrier
remember
to
this,
entry.
and we had some ones that we just did, and we had them on display. And I remember this woman just coming up and be like, I don't get it. I'm like, that's exactly the right, that's what we want. We want you not to understand this. That's perfect.
Yeah, that's so great too. It's also like you're not like social media optimizing
Right,
your
right, right. We're
shares, you
like,
know?
yeah. And it's funny because I remember that buddy of mine, we were both pretty creative kids. He
Yeah.
went on USC film school. He works
Oh,
with Disney now. And I went straight to like the hospitality industry, to real estate. And it wasn't until years later that I started writing. But I'm like, I think I always probably had that in me and just
sure.
didn't you know, didn't even conceptualize what that even meant, like to be a storyteller or go into the creative arts. And even if I had, I probably would have been like, that seems like a ridiculous path. Like, what? Who does that? So now you grew up, you didn't grow up in LA, you grew up in the South.
Yeah, I'm originally from what I call a small town in Arkansas, which is Fort Smith, Arkansas.
Oh, yeah.
It's the setting for True Grit. I tell
Yeah.
people sometimes it's the same town.
Better than the
But
setting for Deliverance. So,
sure, sure, sure. Although I have had some, speaking of that, I have had some Arkansas, friends and fans say, well, Fort Smith is not exactly a small town in Arkansas because a small town in Arkansas might have, 60 people in it.
right. Totally.
And Fort Smith was definitely, I think 80,000 is the population. It was the big city for the
Yeah.
surrounding area.
Right.
But Fort Smith, since I've been born, has the same population. So, in the
Yeah.
country as a whole has probably gone up like 50% since I
Right.
was.
Right.
And so, every time I go home, it's like it's the same, but like time has passed,
Right. Right. Right.
Um,
Right.
so Fort Smith has actually gotten much cooler than it was when I was a kid. They like
Huh.
host a yearly film festival. They have all
Oh.
these murals up everywhere.
Huh.
There's definitely an attempt. We were like an industrial sort of city,
Yeah.
and there's kind of an attempt to make it more of an artsy, vibe, more creative, more of a like a place you could come visit.
Huh.
Which was never, as a
But
kid, I never thought like tourists come.
right, right, right. Why? We're all trying to leave. But growing up there, did you have a sense of feeling like sheltered, or were you like the creative kid who was ready to like move on to different things, or you weren't even that self-aware like most kids?
No, I mean, I think that well, first off, I never felt like there was no, place to do creativity in Arkansas. Like, I feel
Yeah.
like sometimes when people are from small towns or they're from the South or
Right.
whatever, they have this feeling of like, oh, wish I could go out and make something. I always felt like I could make stuff in Arkansas. I mean,
Yeah.
I kind of think that again, I'm not just trying to blow smoke up your ass, but I kind of think that Venice Beach stick figure art kind of thing is the
Yeah.
sort of stuff I like did as a child
Totally. Yeah.
and like was never sort of like a perfect example is like I never was like, oh, I'll move to the big city and become a journalist at a newspaper.
Right.
But
Right.
I did when I was like 8 try to start a newspaper in my like, with my dad's old computer that he had. I guess it wasn't old at the time, but like I wanted to
Right.
make like like a penny sheet or whatever, and
Right.
like I had
Right.
some newsy fantasy that I would sell my news.
Oh, that's great.
And I remember like designing the pages and stuff. I mean, 8 maybe is too young. Maybe I was like 10 or 11, but like definitely not the age that I was going to be able to sell news to people.
Right. Right. You just want to get those op-ed opinions out there.
Yeah. But I get it. No, it's really that thing of like, I really desperately from a very young age wanted to do creative work in the sense that I wanted to make stuff that I could sell to people, that I
Yeah.
could, have that like creative business around.
Yeah.
And I
That's
was never, and I'm skipping around now, but when I visited schools for grad school, I went to I won't say the name of the school, but I went to a great MFA program. And the guy doing the interviews there said to me, he's talking about novels. He
yeah.
said to me, the novel is finished when you're done writing it. You can put it in a drawer. It doesn't matter if anybody reads it.
Right.
And, that's what we teach here at this school.
Right.
And it just was like, I was like, I mean, I'm this like 20 years ago, I'm still horrified by it. I still think that like I can't imagine a more opposite perspective
Right.
on making things than write the book to put in a drawer.
Right.
I've
Right.
never cared about like like literary quality of something independent of it being a communication from like one person to another.
Totally.
I love writing because I love sharing thoughts with human beings,
Right.
you know?
Well, and that's actually a really interesting point that it's funny. We almost never discuss on this show that doesn't come up that often. But when you think about why people write, especially when they write creatively, when they write fiction, and it's never because I can't wait to put this in a drawer. But we never talk about the opposite side of that, which is I want to be heard. I want attention. And a lot of writers have that's a real conflict because they're introverts and they want their stuff out there, but they don't want to be seen in a way. I'm somebody who I'm very comfortable being seen and I want my stuff out there and I want to have a discussion about it. So there is kind of that conversation about like you said, this isn't a journal, this is a form of communication and communication only works when there's a recipient of it.
Right, right.
So
To me, it's not just like I don't think of it as like, oh, if you don't have any readers, you wasted your time. Like I'm not trying to say that success or a large readership is the metric of quality of a work. I do think that there's probably really great novels sitting in drawers somewhere.
right.
But I don't think you can really say it's a great novel until it has been taken out of the drawer
Right.
and,
Right.
and read by someone. And I truly think that like the goal of like, do I want to write a beautiful sentence or do I want to have a beautiful effect on someone?
Right. Right.
And I can't imagine preferring a beautiful sentence in a drawer to a crudely written sentence that hits someone in the right way.
Right. And the worst thing about all of that is and why it's been stuck with you for 20 years from talking to that MFA professor is just the blanket statement of it, which is what I hate about writing. I hate this idea that people tell you it's done this way or it's done that way. It's all such a personal decision. So your why of writing could be I want to write for myself and I want it to be in a drawer. And that's completely, totally valid.
Sure.
And, but that doesn't mean everybody has to be like that. That doesn't mean that's what defines a novel.
Sure.
And I've heard, so did you get your MFA?
I did, but I went and got it at USC in screenwriting, where
Okay.
their pitch was, "You're gonna be famous, kid."
Right, right,
You
right.
know?
That's what spoke to you.
That to me, and I remember discussing it with someone, this exact, conversation, well, 15, 16 years ago or whatever it was, and saying like, obviously they're bullshitting us here
Right,
with regard to us all being famous and successful,
right,
which it's not like they were actively
right. Because
saying.
you can look at previous classes and say these three people were.
Sure, sure. The people that would come and perform. Although I would say our class, like, they could have made that offer. Like, so many people from our class did like phenomenally well, and have
Wow.
all gone on to like, I would say 50% of the people in my 30-person writing class have sold a show, and 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 then probably a similar percentage, although not necessarily the same percentage, have like been staffed on shows,
Wow.
and it's truly like, honestly, I feel like they kind of made good on what was a really ludicrous premise that we
Right.
would all, be able to.
Well, it's
But at the very
it's
least,
the
it was
tough
like,
screenwriting. That and NYU are really kind of the film schools that you want to go to.
even if it wasn't, even if they weren't right in predicting success, or even if it wasn't a success, even if it didn't lead to anything for anyone, the view of writing as which they were very clear on as a communication between artist and audience,
Right.
it's just so fundamentally, to me, the opposite of, beautiful book in a drawer.
Right. Yeah.
And
Totally.
And I just like, and I just remember being like, yeah, obviously they're blowing smoke up our ass. They're trying to get us to come to the school. It's an expensive school. This is a sales job. They say a thing where they say that their acceptance rate, and this is to the accepted students, is lower than Harvard's medical school. And they say this with like, solemn, reverent tones. And even at the time even as I'm choosing to go to the school, I'm like, yeah, but like you don't apply to Harvard Medical School if you're, you know, uh,
Right,
there's a
right. You have a career path pretty
self-selecting.
determined.
Yeah. Yeah, your scores are good, your grades are good. Anybody applies to USC. Like, you can't,
Right,
you're
right,
comparing a metric of like,
right, right. But it sounds good.
it sounded
Yeah.
great.
And
And
and for
and the
sure it's an
dog and
honor to
pony.
get in because it is a very challenging school to get into, and they really do kind of there are plenty of really well qualified people who don't get in.
I didn't get in the first time.
Yeah.
I had applied 2 years, and I have advice I used to tutor high school kids, and I would give advice. I wasn't supposed to give advice on essays because the company had some agreement where somebody else was supposed to do the counseling, and I was only supposed to do test prep. But I would, shoot my
Right.
mouth off. And I always told kids that you should write an essay that you know for a fact, like deep in your bones, that no one else in the world will be able to write. So many people write essays that are about like, how they love science or about
Or
how
my,
like they
my parents got
volunteer.
divorced and this is how it affected
My
me.
parents got divorced. Like,
And
you know,
like, oh, 5,000 kids are writing the same
yes,
thing.
yeah, you get put in the divorce pile.
Right.
And I learned this from applying twice to all of these grad schools. And the first year doing, I sure do love writing. And the second one, I came up with this really sort of, in retrospect, kind of harebrained metaphor. I'd gotten really into reading about Gödel's theory of incompleteness,
Hmm.
of axiomatic systems. Basically, he says that no mathematical logical system can be both complete and consistent, which means in layman's terms, and he's proved this mathematically, that there can be no worldview that both speaks to every issue and doesn't contradict itself.
Right.
So there's a more mathematical explanation for this, but I basically like explained this in how it related to writing as
Huh.
as like my personal statement, and I've labored over it. And it was something that was like, I just knew nobody else was sending an
Nobody. Right.
essay.
Not even AI would come up with that.
Right, right. And so like when I came to school, teachers would be like, "Oh yeah, you had that math essay." That's what it gets
They
reduced.
remember it. Yeah.
Yeah, but
That's
yeah,
cool.
it's stuck in their head as
Right.
opposed to like my previous year's essays, which, were probably less like ridiculous in
Yeah.
that I just wrote about how I loved writing and wanted to write for people. And,
Right.
I
Right.
submitted stories that I thought were good. It's like there's no value to goodness. It's about like
Right.
real uniqueness, I
Right.
think,
Right. 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 Exactly.
especially anytime people are like judging you, which is
Which is
such
all
a
the time.
different world than like, well, no, I don't think like a reader, I don't think when a person picks up a book, like they want to enjoy it,
Right. Right.
they don't want to feel like if they buy your book, it means they're a good person. But I think that's what, like, when people accept you into a school, they want to
Mhm.
feel like if they chose you, it's because
Yeah.
they are like furthering the cause of the human race,
Right. Right.
by
Right.
selecting this individual. Nobody buys Myrtle because they want to like help my life,
Right. Right.
and they want to
Well,
like
and that's
enjoy it.
as it should be.
Yeah, yeah. Yes, I've never been good at pitching myself as someone who is like, saving the world
Yeah.
or is it, an important figure in modern culture. Like
Well,
I've
I
never
mean,
been able
that
to
is
make
a very writerly attitude, I think, in general. Again, it kind of goes back to the whole idea of a lot of writers, I think, struggle with being seen. And, the idea of self-promotion and the idea of, I've written something that is going to change the course of humanity is just anathema to most of us. And I mean, I'll even have people tell me, like, people I know, like, oh, I'm so sorry I haven't read your book yet. I'm like, I will never ask somebody to buy my book. I will
Yeah.
never ask somebody if they've read my book. Um, because it's like, that doesn't matter. I'm putting this out there and whatever happens, happens. That's
Sure.
just all part of it.
I, the great thing about Myrtle for me is I'm maybe not unique in this, but definitely it's an advantage on a typical book, which is that someone can give you Myrtle and you can do one puzzle
Hmm.
and feel like, oh, that was good. And then you can tell your friend who gave you the book that you liked it, and they won't try to talk to you about the ending, they won't.
Right, 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 right.
Like you can appreciate it without, I had an aunt, love her, hope she's not listening, who gave me the the David McCullough like
Oh,
presidential
yeah.
biographies.
The 1,200 page, like,
Yeah, and it was a 3-pack of
right,
them.
right, right,
And I just remember being like, she's gonna ask about these books.
right, right. Let me go to Wikipedia to read about
Yeah,
Eisenhower so I can.
right. I
Oh
gotta
yeah,
learn about Eisenhower to accept this present. And I just think that like I've been very fortunate that the thing that I made is not something that you really can like get it
right,
in 20
right,
minutes
right.
and have enough of the. So I'm like very fortunate. But same I never am like. I also think that I'm very blessed in the sense that I'm not having to like drive around selling them out of the trunk of my car
Right,
to friends
right,
and family. I hear about this story a lot from people, and I think that like, you talking about the Venice thing, I really like to do the work of making the thing,
right,
and sometimes selling the thing is part of making the thing. Like I've done like theater before, and selling tickets and having an audience come in becomes like part of the art, and that can be fun to do, to think of the poster, to think
right.
of the copy on the website that sells
Totally.
it. I love all of that because
Me
that's
too.
that's great, that's communicating. But I don't love like, I wrote this book 5 years ago and I'm individually selling individual copies to
Right.
people.
No.
Like once the selling, I think, can be very creative, and coming up with that copy and coming up with the way to, position it for people. And I
Right.
love that. But I don't like, I would hate to have to like go around and like text my friends and ask them to review it.
Right. If you're
And
a self-pubbed author kind of a thing, which, and again, there's nothing wrong with that, but
oh,
I don't know if you saw this. This happened just last week, maybe even just a few days ago on TikTok. There's a video. This woman takes this video of this guy who's an author who's doing a signing at a Barnes and Noble. He's
uh-huh.
just, and I mean, it just viscerally hit me because I'm like, I've done this countless times, sitting at the table, just passersby kind of going wherever. And he's just sitting there and nobody's coming up to him. I'm like, I totally get that. And she just kind of says, oh my God, I feel so bad for this guy. So I went and bought a copy of his book. And this woman who shot the video has like however many million followers, created this firestorm of people who now went out and bought this guy's book because they felt bad for him in this video. And now he's like this bestseller. I'm like, it changed his life. I mean, we didn't have that. I mean, I'm doing a Barnes and Noble in a few weeks and I'm like, this is going to be me. I can tell you right now, unless I bring fucking cookies or whatever to put on the table, so
There's a
you never know how it's going to hit.
there's a famous video of a guy of like I think it's an artist. It might be a novel. Like someone invented this genre of video, which is the like, no one bought my father's book. There's this, like there's articles about it because it's like the daughter of this guy is shooting a video where she like shoots it through the doors, and it's like he's worked on his book, every day for the last 2 years. And when it came out, no one purchased it. And a very similar thing happened. There's a groundswell of support for this, this sad man author. And then I think that it even led to selling a sequel to a traditional publisher.
That's
Maybe
amazing.
not maybe not like a big five. I don't really remember the details, but kind of a thing that came out. I mean, came out is maybe the wrong word because there's nothing like fraudulent, but was that the daughter shooting this video is like a, professional social media manager for
Right.
some brand. And
Marketing expert.
she knows very clearly that if you can pull on people, I mean, I used to have a website when I was a little kid, like when I was 12 or 13, and nobody had websites. My father had read a Time magazine article, I think, about people are buying websites. So he
Yeah.
got us a family domain name
Right. And then you go
and
to
then was like, you
GeoCities
do
and
it. Yeah, no, we had it. We didn't have .com because my uncle had .com, but we did have .net. And for years I ran it, I ran it as like a personal website. And I remembered back then the big link aggregator was called Fark.com. I don't
oh
know,
yeah, I remember Fark.
but it
Yeah.
was huge. And getting a link on Fark was like, meant just a wild influx of traffic.
Yeah.
And I learned at probably like 12 or 13 that if you could submit your own art or your own project in a self-deprecating way, not a self-deprecating way, in like a look at this idiot kind of way,
Right. Right.
it
Right.
was so much more likely to get chosen,
Right.
shared around, and that, I as a 12-year-old, I didn't care what strangers on Fark.com, if they were making fun of me, if it meant 10,000 people
Right.
visiting my
Totally.
website. And that's sort of like, can you sell the product as something that is, I mean, that's like as good to buy, as like if I pre-ordered this guy's book or, this sad person's book, I'll support them. To me, I'll do it any way I could,
Right. Right.
I would have
Right.
said anything I can. But it also makes you feel a little bit like, they're not buying the book for me though, or for the
Right.
book. They're buying it
Totally.
like to pat me on the back, make me feel good, make them feel good.
Right. Right. Right.
And so to me, that's like a great ad. And if your book can if the book appeals to the same sentiment, great launching pad.
Right. Right.
If the book is about like, taking care of the little ones and making sure that David beats Goliath, that could be a hit book. But if he's written like a hard-edged thriller about Mike Hammer,
Right.
running
Right.
down the bad guys, I wonder if that's the same demo,
Yeah, you never know. So I want to ask a little bit about, because I know I want to kind of go through the Myrtle history, but I know also screenwriter, novelist, you have varied interests and pursuits. I just think it's a great story because it's just like you can't ever know. You can't ever know what is going to be the thing. And what I've evidenced in my own 20-year history of doing this, starting from the fact of starting to write without any background or previous interest in it, just literally starting on one day and knowing that you can't know. It's the only thing that's knowable is that the thing that happens that's going to make the impact is not ever the thing you expect. Like even if a lot of times you can't even conceptualize what it's going to be.
Yeah.
So explain a little bit about the inception of Myrtle and just what it is.
Yeah. Murdle is a book and a website that is a murder mystery logic puzzle that anyone can solve. I think of it as like a newspaper puzzle, like a Sudoku or a crossword, not like a cryptic riddle that you might look at for 5 seconds and then flip to the back and see what the answer is. It's an accessible puzzle. You're given suspects, weapons, and locations, and then a series of clues that link them. Major Red had the bazooka. And as you fill in the grid, you learn it wasn't just that Major Red had the bazooka, but the bazooka was in the Screaming Forest. Ergo, Major Red was in the Screaming Forest. And by these sorts of logical deductions, you finally come to the only suspect who could have had the murder weapon or who could have been at the scene of the crime when it was committed. So you're able to solve the case. In the book, you write down your answer. On the website, you fill it in. And then you find out if you were right or not. And my goal with it is to create a puzzle where you can feel challenged, but kind of always get the right answer.
Right.
Similar to like a crossword or to like Wordle, for example. We met with the New York Times and they told me that 95% of people who do a Wordle get it correct, like solve the Wordle. And I think a lot of times, this is what I've learned
Like on
making
any
puzzles.
given day, basically.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, on any given day. Yeah. And what I've learned with making puzzles, because I came into this very sideways. It was a very, like you just said, like not predicted pathway, not my intention, with my life to make puzzles. But I stumbled on this because I made the first one for a friend of mine, just as like a lark to procrastinate on finishing a book, which is the
Right.
hardest thing in the world. And I made this puzzle as a lark, and he really liked it, and it sort of snowballed. And I think that if I had been super into puzzles, because I now have met many, many puzzle people, and they love making really challenging puzzles that their puzzle comrades, can pull their hair out.
Right. Right.
And because I was not in a social situation where I was trying to impress other puzzle people, I kind of had a more clear-eyed approximation of what people want in a puzzle,
Right.
which
Right. The
is
general public. Right.
yeah, which is like I want to get it right 95% of the time. And I want to feel like yeah, it wasn't I don't like they want to feel accomplished and smart, and they want to feel like they cracked the case. And it's very difficult to create a pathway that leads people to the right answer without making them feel like it was given to them.
Right. Right. Oh, I'm
And
sure.
I think that's kind of the art of making puzzles. And most professional puzzle people make them way, 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 way too hard.
Right.
And especially too and I'm getting a little into the weeds here, but especially like right when you sit down,
Right.
you really should be able to do like the first thing
Right. To
pretty
have some
easily.
sense of
Yeah,
accomplishment.
I'm getting into it. I think
Right.
there's some puzzles that are like Sudoku has this effect on people. Even though Sudoku is a simple puzzle, anyone can understand the rules, most people have a very negative reaction to the specter of math. The concept that they might have to do math is so alienating to people
Right.
that when you just look at a Sudoku, like so many people have the reaction of like, no, and they just kind of panic.
Right.
And I mean, Sudoku obviously hugely blew up. And once you sort of, and all Sudoku tutorials say there is no math involved. They always assure you of that, which is funny because actually the logical process of solving a Sudoku, I would argue, is mathematics.
Right. Right.
But you can't tell people that because then they won't do it.
Right. You don't actually have to know algebra to do Sudoku.
Yes, yes, yes. Although there are versions of Sudoku where you have to add and multiply and divide, and puzzle people love them. And 1% of the Sudoku audience has ever tried one. It's like
So, but then just going back to Wordle real quickly. So, or sorry, not Wordle, but Myrtle.
well, I just brought up Wordle, so you'd be forgiven.
Because it makes just me think because I'm a big Wordle guy. I'm connections,
Yeah,
the mini
yeah,
crosswords.
yeah.
I do
I
that
love
every
all
day.
those puzzles.
Um, but you kind of hit it out of the park. It kind of, and it's funny because again, not to make this about me, but when I started writing, it started as a riddle I gave myself to pass time during this continuing education class. And I couldn't solve the riddle. This one I just made up, a murder mystery riddle I made up, wrote it down, couldn't figure out the backstory to explain it. So I just kept writing when I got home, and this turned into a manuscript. So again, it's very much like you did this for a friend, just to pass the time for procrastination. You just don't know where that shit is going to go. And that's so
Yeah.
amazing to me.
It's
Go
it's
ahead.
so funny too what you said about like that it was a riddle that you're doing to yourself. I wrote so many things where the animating thought in my head was, wouldn't it be great if this was really popular?
Hmm.
And where it was like every day I'd sit down to write, and the thing that would keep me going would be like a fantasy of the film, or it's
Right.
a huge hit, it's in everybody's pocket,
Right. Right.
and and I think that that's like very like it eats away at the soul of the thing,
Huh.
or maybe prevents it from having that sort of core essence at all, because you just get so caught up in imagining stuff that you couldn't ever calculate for. You
Right, right. But I would actually argue that it could go one of two ways because right, if you're spending too much time thinking about its potential popularity without being having inspired action to create something that would be that, then yes, it eats away at it. On the other hand, if you're visualizing that and you're almost kind of manifesting it through what maybe some people would consider delusion, but I would consider to be like, hey, yeah, put that energy out there.
Yeah.
Because whenever I'm writing a novel, at least for part of it, I think it's the best thing I've ever written.
Oh, sure, sure, sure,
Um,
sure. You're right. If you don't have that, you won't continue to work on
right.
it.
It's much better than be writing something like this is a piece of shit.
Right, right.
Because then you're dooming yourself. But I
Sure.
totally, but I'm sure in this case with Myrtle, I can't imagine you had any expectation that wasn't completely and wildly surpassed by reality.
I
And you're
mean,
just like, I guess this is what I'm doing with my life now.
yeah, yeah. Well, okay, so there is a little bit of to like complicate it a little, the story. There is an aspect of my fantasy of being, wildly successful that kept me going in this, which is that post-pandemic, I really decided that I would focus on specifically the genre of murder mysteries,
Mm-hmm.
that you could solve along with the like Agatha Christie style kind of golden age fair play whodunits, and that I would very much limit myself to this sphere. And I had this project in, gosh, I think 2022, I guess, where I was going to make a new little mystery every week. And I was trying to finish up a book from like the previous life kind of thing. I was sort of trying to turn a page, and then I was going to just focus on this specific like commercial genre. And I say commercial, that sounds wrong. I just meant like I wanted to provide something that people had set expectations for.
Totally.
Because I got really caught up as a creative person in trying to, break genres and mash things together and create, little weird, inexplicable things. And I just was finding, very little success with that.
Yeah.
People would like stuff, but, there's not like a built-in mechanism for sharing it. And so I decided, look, I'm going to try to rebrand myself, not that I had a brand in any real capacity, specifically in mysteries. And so I purchased gtkmysteries.com, which is now defunct because it's now just myrtle.com. But this is the origin story of getting there. And I came up with a little schedule for myself of like, here are the first, 10 little mystery things I'm going to post. And there's like a short story. I wrote a play that I staged at a restaurant nearby. This is a
Great.
whodunit play, and I did a bunch of little things like that. And then, not as part of my planning really, I made this short puzzle, a murder mystery for a friend of mine. And it's sort of a weird kind of combination of the two,
Mm-hmm.
is that I had a frame of a very like business minded, brand management, trying to be realistic about being a working writer. And then the thing that I made that fit into that, I wasn't really making for that. I was legitimately making it for a friend of
Right.
mine.
It just fit.
Yeah, and didn't feel, and it took me a while actually. I didn't feel like Myrtle was like enough at first. I thought it
Right.
would be something you'd do two or three of, and then you'd be like, yeah, I like this guy's mysteries. I'd love to see something else.
Right.
And, you know, it was kind of the opposite, which is that it people, I guess, are interested in other things that I make, but really they want more Myrtle.
Right. Yeah.
And that I think that all of the stuff that I really calculated through, I don't think could have accomplished the same thing as like, and I wish I could figure out exactly the like the metaphysical language to like describe this plan to people of like figure out an exact brand for yourself, and then within that, try to just make something that someone you know really likes.
Right, right.
Because
I
I feel like the union of those two things is what really helped.
what strikes me a little bit being a thriller writer and seeing an evolution to my works over the years and my own writing style, that just naturally as it evolved to be kind of more staccato style writing, very short chapters, a lot of tension, very few descriptions, and that's gotten more and more popular with my works. I start to realize, like, and it kind of makes me think about Myrtle a little bit. It's like, this is a huge blanket statement, which is not wholly accurate by any means, but the national attention span is tightening, right? And I write books that are highly consumable, at a fast pace. People go to your website and they see all these different things you're offering or you offered at the time, and then Myrtle's part of it. They're like, oh, that's something I can achieve. That's something I can do. That's something that gives me that immediate endorphin rush. I want more of that. I'm going to tap on that until more pellets come down.
Yeah, yeah.
And there is some kind of communal element there in terms of like people's ability to consume, get the rush, and then want more without having to, I don't want to say think, but without having, like, if I want to go read like a really thick, if I want to go read the David McCullough book, that's for a different time, a different part of my brain that's ready for that. But this, I can, it's a feast. I can always have some.
Yeah, I think that, like, I just went back to my Arkansas school and I spoke a little bit about, like,
Oh, how cool.
Yeah, it was super exciting. Although they said, I went to the honors college and they said the last person who gave this lecture in this program was the man who discovered dark energy.
Well, Myrtle's kind of dark energy.
Yeah, and I was like, yeah, okay. Like, so I'm a yokel. Got it. Okay.
But I'm here.
Yeah. But it was great. But one of the things that I kind of tried to sort of give a, like, if you want to make books, here's some things that I feel like I've gleaned. And one of those is that I always would try to create these complicated things that
Right.
people could kind of puzzle over, or
Right.
they could, like, reread and re-examine. And, like, there was one of the things I would love to do in a book is have some, like separate, like, shadow narrative occur throughout it that wouldn't really be apparent at first read, but that
Right.
if you really
Right.
delved into it, you could
Totally.
find it. And people can't, they don't like that. They
Right.
don't.
Or they
And
just don't get it.
if that existed in a thing after the, like, little snack of enjoyment, that's great. It's great to have a rich world,
Right.
endlessly. But I told the kids, I said, I really think that for commercial writing, the product that you're selling is simplicity.
Oh
You
my God, I can't agree with you more.
you're like taking something and you're saying, like, you want this, I'll give it to you. Like,
Right.
and I hear you talking about, like, your books being like, there's tension, it's fast paced. You can jump right in.
Right. Right.
There's no sense of, like, you know, you got to sit down and first you got to know the history of America and you got to
Right.
understand.
Or like thematically, you're trying to like, well, this is really this chapter is really an ode to some obscure 18th century novel that nobody's going to get. I mean, I can't, and I think it's very important to be clear here because we have a lot of aspiring writers who listen to this. That simple doesn't mean uncomplicated, doesn't mean it's not something that you can really get a lot of meaning out of. I just mean in terms of like, don't spend all your time trying to hide clues that nobody's going to see because you're expecting them to really be fulfilled by the third or fourth read. You can do that with a movie because people will go back and watch it. They'll go back to Pulp Fiction. They'll watch the scene where he peels off the Band-Aid, see his soul coming out. Like, then they'll get that because you have time to do that, but they're not going to reread your books.
This is sort of the key, the paradox or whatever of creating, which is that when you truly love something, and I loved Pulp Fiction in high school, I saw that movie and then I watched it. I'm like 16 years old, which I think the ideal time to
Right,
see
right.
that movie. And I'm blown away and I start swearing all the time.
Right.
I was like, oh, that's cool. And and when you love something, what you love are those weird little details and the
Right,
like problematic corners of the narrative that, kind of don't fit in and you're like, what is that? Why is that?
right.
But when I watched Pulp Fiction for the first time, it wasn't,
You're
you
not
know,
picking up on all that.
no, you're
Yeah.
just like it's just and I mean for Pulp Fiction is such a great example because like what a movie that just hooks you and really just seems to be trying to entertain you.
Right, right. Because there is still a simple narrative drive to it all.
Yeah. And
Maybe
it
disparate stories, but
almost every scene in that movie too is like that sets up some sort of potential violent outcome or
right, right,
consequence,
right. So there's that tension and suspense that's always kind of hanging there.
And the whole, John Travolta going on the date with Uma Thurman, and the whole
Right,
premise of it is that like if he is too familiar with her, he's going to be murdered.
right,
And then
right,
the date is like, goes it's like the most alluring possible date kind of.
right, right, right.
And the,
And he
the
can't help
sense of
himself.
like the better this date goes, your life is in danger.
Right, right,
It's like such a difference between the kinds of things that I think it's easy to write, which is like you do that scene, but you don't make it so explicit. You don't have the scene previously where they say very specifically, if if Marcellus Wallace hears that you were too familiar with his wife, he's going to murder you. There was this other guy that he murdered, like
right,
or threw out of a building or whatever. It's like so explicit and so clear that when you have that scene, there's tension. You have
right,
that sequence
right,
and I think that it's so easy to like do the like Quentin Tarantino, we're going to cut around. It's going to be like spontaneous violence. We're going to have all these weird characters intersecting in strange ways. But if you're not very careful that every little scene and sequence has something that people can so clearly understand what they
right,
want to happen, what they're afraid of happening,
right.
like, you got to
Yeah,
set that up immediately. People, like you said, people have no attention spans and it particularly like, and we've all been this experience, like, you know, even the person at the Barnes and Noble, you pick up the book and you look at the back and you're just like, nah,
right.
no.
It
And it's
still has
like,
to be right.
yeah, and it's like it's so hard to not get like, oh, that's interesting. And most books, I think that like I like most of the stuff that I actually read.
Yeah,
I'm not like a huge judgmental author.
right.
I guess I don't finish a lot of books, but it's never because I thought they were horrible, usually. To
It's
to
just, yeah,
me,
you've got
to
a lot
me,
of only so much time in your
yeah,
day.
there's so much out there.
Right.
There's probably I don't know the number, but there's probably 1,000 books published a day that are readable,
Right. You're
aren't.
chasing that last book that you read that stuck with you.
Yeah.
And that's pretty rare that you get those where you're just like, okay, this is an undeniable book.
Yeah. Well, and I think that there's this wild thing too, which is that like I during the pandemic, I devoured Agatha Christie books.
Yeah.
And and she's not for everybody, but if you like puzzling these little mysteries out in, an English, country house, she gives it to you.
Right.
Like here and then and if you liked that one, oh, oh boy, you've got 80 others,
Right. Right.
you know, and
Right.
they're all the same,
Right.
you know?
They're all on brand. Yeah. You know
Yeah,
what
yeah.
you're going to get.
And look, I mean, obviously, as a creative, I love a lot of writers who've written, 3 books in their lives, and they were different books, and that can be great, And I think everybody as a writer a little bit, wants to be, the reclusive genius, who produces this masterpiece, this
Right.
undeniable
Right. The
masterpiece.
Harper Lee. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I mean, a Harper Lee, man, because I mean, you're the same. We're working really hard, and the vibe of Harper. I sometimes think about Harper Lee. I'm like one and done,
Yeah. Well, the second one's coming out. Like they found
Oh
some
no,
manuscript.
it came out. I bought it.
Oh,
I
you
bought
bought
it.
it? Okay, I
Go
didn't
Set a
know it was out
Watchman.
yet.
It's a very controversial thing because she obviously this is the first draft of To Kill a Mockingbird. It
Yeah,
goes to Watchmen, not to Tangent, and she submitted this to her agent. This to me is a brilliant story, the historic story. I think the publishing of the novel was probably she was getting a little out of it, and
she
they
had
kind of
dementia. Yeah,
yeah, they kind of I think that they snuck one by her, and maybe she was fine with it anyway.
yeah.
But Go Set a Watchman was her initial early draft of To Kill a Mockingbird. And it's about Scout going back to her hometown in her like 30s or 20s or something, I don't really remember, and discovering that her father, Atticus Finch, who had been a great fighter for civil rights, is a member of not the Klan, but like a segregation, a pro-segregation
Oh
organization,
wow, huh?
and her dealing with disillusionment of her father. And in this book, there are flashbacks to her father's great history as a civil rights attorney
Which
when he
became the
was a
book.
child. Yes. And her agent was like, you got to write that book. And you can imagine finishing a book and being told, no, 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 you got to write another
I
book.
like this subplot. Make that into
Yeah.
the novel, right?
But like, woof, what a note. Like maybe the most commercially beneficial note ever given to an author
Right,
history of
right,
book. Like,
right. Because the agent's like, let's just not bum people out. Let's tell the.
yes, yes, it's a super bummer. And I think actually, I didn't finish Go Set a Watchman. I read like a third of it,
Huh.
and or Go Tell a Watch. I don't remember what it is, but it's like I think it's a very compelling and interesting sequel to this book, which is that this hero Atticus Finch actually is a complex person
Right,
who he
right.
doesn't live up to
He's
the
way
idea.
more morally gray.
Yeah, and
Right,
I think that's a very interesting premise for a book.
right.
But like, man, I mean, in Arkansas, that book was assigned at every school I went to. Like, we read that book at elementary school,
Hmm.
then assigned again in junior high, and then it was then assigned again in an English class in high school.
Wow.
And I think it just provides, we can get into the more, I think that part of what To Kill a Mockingbird provides is sort of absolution to the South in the sense that you can read this book and feel like the good guys, it's morally complex, bad stuff happens, but there's good
Right,
people,
right,
there is a source of idealism and whatever. And I think the reason schools read it is because it can kind of tell kids like, you can be morally uncomplicated. You
right,
can, sure, the
right.
outcomes might not be great, but you can be, and they're never going to recommend a book. Yeah, I mean, I never would have read a book 3 times where someone goes home and finds out their dad is a racist. Like,
Right, right. Well, and that's it. What kind of my final note on this is that duality of her new book showing kind of this other side, this unexpected side to her father, is in direct parallel with the flip side of that. In To Kill a Mockingbird, finding out Boo Radley is not this boogeyman,
yes,
and he's
yes,
actually a
yes,
hero.
yes, yes. The
So,
Boo
like,
Radley, and I didn't even mention that, but
subverting
that is like,
expectations.
what a great, like, I mean, my favorite thing in fiction is when a character that you think of as a villain, turns out to be a good guy or flips or,
Right, right, right,
you know,
right. Exactly.
cries
Without
at
it being too
everything.
ham-handed about it.
Yeah, if you can
Yeah,
figure out a way to make it seem
right.
legitimate, uh, uh,
Interesting. Well,
that is,
Greg, we need to wrap up because we're running
oh
long.
no,
But before we do, we're going to do our own little storytelling if you're up for it, because
I would love to.
you're a creative, spontaneous guy. So I think this is going to go well.
I'm a little nervous.
I've got 3 books that I've chosen from my bookshelf, mostly at random. They're not completely because they all have the word murder in them, in the title. You're going to choose one of those books. We're going to choose a random sentence from a random page. I'm going to read that sentence, and that'll be the first sentence in like a 2-minute long short story. So I'm going to read this first sentence, then you give me the next whatever sentence or 2 that comes to your head that happens next, and then I'll do a sentence or 2, and then we'll call it a day when it when it gets too out of control.
Okay. Okay.
I've got Matt Goldman's The Murder Show, Stuart Turton's The Last Murder at the End of the World, and Kristen Perrin's How to Solve Your Own Murder. So,
Okay, I have read How to Solve Your Own Murdle. It's great. Or murder. Wow. I've read How to Solve Your Own Murder. It's great. So let's skip that one because I don't want to
be influenced.
write my Go Set a Watchman version of her book. I would do that second one.
Okay, The Last Murder at the End of the World, which is fantastic.
Very compelling title.
Stu is a great writer. Give me a number between 100 and 343. Sorry, 1 and 343.
127.
Okay, I'm going to quickly scan page 127. It's the very end of a chapter. All right, I'm just going to read this very simple, basic sentence, and you do whatever you want with it. The character's name is Thea, Thea, just for reference. Thea stares at him, her pulse quickening with fear.
We've got to do something before they find out, she says.
But she didn't understand why he was just standing there, doing nothing, hands in his pocket. And as her frustration grew, she finally noticed the 3 little specklets of blood on the nape of his neck.
Wait a second. Were you responsible for this?
He slowly lifted his head, looked at her dead-eyed, 1,000-yard stare, but he didn't reply.
If we don't clear this up, she said, it won't just be you that gets in trouble for it. I'm involved too now.
It was at that moment he finally removed one hand from his pocket. And even though she barely had to flick her glance down, it was enough for her to see the blood-stained 3-inch knife he was squeezing between his fingers.
Give it to me, she says.
I think we call it there because give it to me is a great ending because I'm picturing, oh, he gives it to her. See,
you're good at this.
It's a little, well, I've got to do it every time.
It's a kind of a fun exercise.
It really is. So it's, obviously the roots are improv. So it's the whole yes and.
Yeah.
So we have to accept each other's premise. But sometimes you just get into this mind meld where you're like, oh, yeah, we both see where this is going. And then one person's like, I can't wait to subvert your expectations.
Sure.
It's fun. So here, that's your next, this is your next Myrtle, is some kind of like, exchange of murder ideas where people have to build the plot together.
I love I think that's what I maybe am leaning towards in that story. I love when a couple like is really on the same page about doing crimes.
Totally. Like, right. And then the best part of that is like, as a viewer, one person, you're totally like, yeah, of course they would be like that. And then when you see the other person's into it, then you're like, and that you don't expect that. You're like, oh, that just revealed everything about this person's character that completely surprised me.
I think that characters, if you feel like you truly understand a character and then they act in a way that you could not have predicted, but which makes sense.
Right.
In the presentation of it. That to me is like the whole game.
Totally. Yeah.
Growth. I mean, it's, I love that.
Well, listen, man, Yeah, I love talking to you, Greg. I feel like we could talk on and on and on, and maybe someday we'll get a chance to kind of hang out and do that because I think we'd have a good time just talking about all the stuff that we've been discussing for the last hour.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah,
but
absolutely.
congrats on all the success with your books. It's amazing. It's a great story, and yeah, like I said, I hope to get to meet you in person someday.
Yeah, same, absolutely. Are you ever in Los Angeles now?
I was just there actually, but from time to time, once in a while, I go back to see friends or if have some kind of work there or something like that. But yeah, if I'm out there, I'll
Yeah.
definitely reach out to you.
Yeah, put me in the rotation.
All right, man. Enjoy the rest of your day.
I thank you, you too.
Bye. All right, that's it. That is my conversation with GT Karber. It was a good one. Like I said, far ranging, went down paths that I didn't expect to go down. But that is the beauty of this show. That is the beauty of writing. So I really had a good time talking to GT. You can check him out at gtkarber.com. But more famously, you can just go to Murdle.com and see about his amazing creation, which is flying off the bookshelves. And then please go visit my website, carterwilson.com, and you can check out my events, my books, my sign up for my newsletter, my blog, other episodes of Making It Up. And then at unboundwriter.com, you can explore any kind of help that you might need as a writer that we can provide to you. All right. So much for the promo. That is it, friends. I hope you enjoyed this episode. I know I did. Another episode out just next week. Thank you so much for watching and or listening. See you next week. Take care.